Hey guys, I'm going to show you how to do a simple upload with Multer. And so this is what it's going to look like. Alright, pretty simple. Let's jump right into it. Okay, so first what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder just to store all of the uploads, right? So I'll just name it uploads. Then I'll create another one inside of it called images. Then I'm going to go to my index. And this is where I'm going to build everything, right? So first I'm going to grab a progress bar from Bootstrap. And let me go ahead and just grab, say, this one. And then I'm going to delete this. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and start to build my form. And then I'm going to have a label. It's going to say browse and my browse button, and the class will be the Bootstrap button class. And then this is going to be the file input. So it's going to be type file. So name, make sure it's something that you remember. I'm going to go ahead and say my file. Then I'm going to disable this whenever something is uploading. So I'll just say uploading. Style is going to be display none. You'll see why in a second. Okay, then I'm going to add my submit button. So let me go ahead and actually insert a few breaks in here. And then just going to use some more Bootstrap for this. And then I'm also going to disable this one when something is uploading. Okay, let me actually move this. Okay, so let me show you what this looks like. Alright, so we just have a simple upload form here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide this. I'm only going to display this when something's getting uploaded, but I just want to show you what it looks like. And then below this, I'm going to add a preview window. I'm going to actually make this an ng-src. And then I'm going to name this thumbnail.data URL. And I'm going to go ahead, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Facebook default picture, and I'm going to have that there in the meantime. So I'll just copy this. You'll see why in a second, why I'm doing that. Okay, and then I'm also going to add some options for error messages, right? So I'm just going to add a div that says class alert. Then I'll say message. Okay, so this is where I'll display all of my messages, and I'm actually going to make this an ng class so I can control it with Angular. And then I'm only going to show it if there is a message. Okay, so let me show you what this all looks like. I'll actually close that. Okay, so we have this huge image here. So I'm just going to add some quick CSS to it. Oops. I'll say my thumbnail. Oops. Say width 100%, height 100%, and then max width will be, we'll say 400 pixels. Okay, so that'll fix it up a little bit and make it a little bit more reasonable size. Now, go ahead and close that. I don't need that anymore. I'm going to go ahead and change this loading bar. It's the same thing. I'm going to do ng show uploading just like I did on the input forms down here. Okay, so now we need a way for Angular to read this file. Okay, so what we need to do is create a directive. So I'm just going to do that real quick. Create a new folder, say directives. And then I'm going to name this directive say file model.js. Okay, and before you forget, go ahead and add it to your index. Let me just add it right here. I'll say script. Okay, now let's go ahead and build this directive. I'll name it file model directive. No dependencies. Then the actual directive is going to be called file model. And so what we're going to do is we're going to assign this as an attribute. So what we'll do is go back to the input, right, the one with the file, and go ahead and paste that in there. Okay, and so the way Angular directives are handled for attributes is every time you have this camel case, it's gonna signify a dash. So in other words, this is what it's actually gonna look like, right? So because we have that camel case, we have that dash there. So you can go ahead and delete that. And then we can name this whatever we want, right? So I'll say file.upload, right? So file is going to be the object, and then upload is going to be a property of the file object, okay? So let's go back to our directive and finish that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use Angular's parse service, okay? A couple of these is really what we're going to use, and really these two. So I'm going to copy that, whoops. And I'm going to paste that at the bottom here, okay? So what we'll do is we'll inject it as a dependency. So we'll say parse followed by function with parse inside of it. So what we'll do is, return. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the directive samples that they have on the Angular website, just to kind of guide me of what this is supposed to look like, just in case I don't want to mess up here. So okay, I don't need, well, I can leave that part, get rid of this. Okay. So we're going to start off with the link function. Oh, actually, no, I want to restrict this to attributes, right? Because that's where we're using it. So to do that, you just use restrict a, and then we're going to link the function. And then just like in the example below, we're going to pass in scope, element, and then attributes. Whoops. I think it's ATTRS. I don't know why they have the R there. Maybe it doesn't matter. But anyway, so then we're going to create a variable to save our parsed data. So we'll call it parsed file. Okay. And then to parse it, all you do is just type in parse function, and then attributes, and then the name of the attribute as defined in our file model, right? So in our directive. So we'll just paste that here. Okay. And so then we need to do this part right here, which is assign. Okay, so what that looks like is like this. We can create a new variable for it. We can say parse file setter, and then parsed file dot assign. Okay. So we can get rid of this. And now we're going to do something similar to this bottom portion here. So what it's going to look like is we're going to say element.bind change, right? And so what this does is it's going to watch the element, and anytime it changes, it's going to parse the file and then update the scope, okay? And so we're going to pass in a function. We're going to say scope.apply, and so that's how we update it. Pass in a function again, and we'll say parsed file setter scope element, the first element, and then the first file. Okay, so it's not as complicated as it looks. All we're really doing is just parsing the file, and then we're updating the scope with our new file, okay? Okay, so then we want to grab this name of our application here and pass it in, into our controller. So find your controller and inject that in there. And then also the name of the directive, you want to pass that into the function. Okay, so just like that. And this is usually the point where I go back to my site and I refresh just to make sure. See, you'll get this error sometimes on the side here if something went wrong. So let's go back and see what we did wrong. And actually what we did wrong is I realized you don't have to pass this into the function. Okay, so let's go ahead and hit refresh and make sure. Okay, there we go. We're good to go. All right, let's move on. So now what we need to do is create a service that is going to handle this parsed file and send it to our backend, right? So I'm going to create a new service and I'm going to name it, say upload file service.js. And then I'm going to go into my index and make sure I map that. Okay, let's go ahead and build this out. And I'm going to name it upload file. And before I forget, whoops, pass that in here. Okay, and then this one actually does get passed into the controller, okay? I always forget directives go in the dependency, and then the service goes into the function because you're going to use it inside of the function, whereas this gets used in the HTML side. Okay, so going back, let's go ahead and finish this. So I'm going to pass in HTTP because I just know that that's what I'm going to use to post, of course. Can't use anything else. We'll say upload. Okay, and then we're going to pass in the file that's coming from this input, right? That gets parsed, okay, and then it gets passed into this service. So what we're going to do is create new form data, right? So we'll say new form data. And so form data is basically just key value pairs. So for example, it's like name and then David, right? So that's how our form data is modeled. So what we need to do is take that file and plug it in, right? So we already have the value of the file that's being passed into the function. So what we need to do is name whatever we want. And so where we get that name from is what we named it here. So I'm going to copy this, right? The input name, my file. Let me use that same one right here, okay? So let me actually delete this. But so what it's going to look like is fd append, and so what we're going to do is the first one is going to be the name, the key, followed by the value, which is going to be file, and then remember file was the object, but upload is the actual file that's attached to that object, right? So we'll just say file.upload. Okay, and then so finally, all we have to do now is the HTTP post request to the server, so we can save that file, right? So we'll say HTTP .post, and then we'll say, actually, don't forget to type in return because we got to send this back, and so we'll say, so right here, we're actually going to name the route. We haven't created it yet on our server, but we can name this whatever we want. So I'll say upload. Okay. Then we're going to pass the form data. And then we're going to do one last part that's required for forms to be sent, multi-part forms, that is. So Angular serializes this data in the way that we're using it. So in order to remove that, we have to do this, right? So it's going to be transform request Angular identity, followed by headers, content type, undefined, right? So if you don't do that part, you will get an error when you try to post this data because Angular is going to be serializing it. So as I always say, I like to go back and refresh to make sure that I'm not getting any errors on my console here. Okay, so now we're ready for pretty much the last step, which is to create this route, right? So I'm going to copy it just in case. Go over to my server, and I'm going to paste it somewhere down here so that I know, okay, to use this route. So we're going to go ahead and install a few things before we move on. We're going to need Multer. So if you just search Google Multer and Multer ExpressJS, or I think even just MulterJS, you'll get the GitHub page. And so what we'll do is we'll just copy the installation. Okay. And then we'll go back and we'll grab this part right here. So we are going to use the rest of this, but I want to do some customizing. So let's go down to the bottom and grab, let's see, where is it? Okay, yeah, I'm going to use this one right here. Then I'm going to paste that right below here. Okay, let me fix this up a bit. Okay, and then I'm going to go back and grab the route. And the one I like to use is this one for single file uploads. So, whoops. Go ahead and paste that right below. And then I'm going to change it to what we identified before, which is /uploads. And I can delete this. Okay. And so this part right here, the name of a single upload, that has to match whatever is in your file model name. So this one, the name my file, because if you remember, that's what we passed right here. So that's what the route is going to be expecting. It's going to be expecting the my file and then the data, which is the file.upload. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just change that right here. We'll say my file. And so what I like to do is you can actually take this part and paste it on the back of this line right here, the upload Multer storage part. You can actually just paste it there and then get rid of this. You don't need that. Okay. And so let me go ahead and hit save on that, make sure everything's fine. Okay, I'm missing a few semicolons here, of course. Okay, anyway, moving on, I'm going to do a few customizations here. The first thing I want to do is I want to change this directory. This is telling you where you want to save the file. And you can do a lot with this, like you can create a new directory for each user within this function, however you want to do it. But for right now, I'm just going to pick this folder that we set up earlier. So for my configuration, it's going to look like this. Uploads, images, / and then we'll dump a file in there. Okay, so going back to the Multer GitHub, there's a lot of really cool things that you can add to this. Like, for example, I'm about to add this limits. You can set a file size max value, so it's really easy to do. And so what you do is I'm actually going to go ahead and bring down this storage. Okay, and I'm going to add limits, and then I'm going to say file size, and I'm going to make it 10 megabytes. Okay, and of course you can set that to whatever you want. This is the only limitation I'm going to set for right now. There's other ones if you want to read about it, but that's all I'm going to use for right now. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do is right here in the file name. It doesn't really matter. You can do it in destination, but I'm just doing it here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this file object and I'm going to go through it to make sure that it meets the criteria of what I want. So in this case, I only want it to be images. And so our file object has a few different properties, right? So I'll show you Multer where it shows you that. If you go to API section, these are all the options that you have. So I'm going to go ahead and play with the original name, because the original name gives you like the exact file name plus that .jpg, whatever. So it's going to look like this: file.original name. Okay. And so what I want to do with that is I want to make sure it has the extension that I approve, right? So say, for example, I only want this. Let's say I want this and I want this, or maybe I want this, right? So the point is you can filter it at this point to be whatever it is that you want, right? So say for this example, I'm only going to do, let's say I'm only going to do this type, right? So the way you do this is with a regular expression. So what you say is, we'll say dot match, and then we'll say it's going to look like this, dot, and then inside the parentheses, it's going to be every file type that you want, right? So for example, let's say you wanted multiple file types, right? This is what it would look like. Right. Oops, sorry, not with the dot, just with the, because we already have the dot right here, so just the name of it. So for this example, I'm only going to put this, only because I want to show you what happens. So let's put this in an if statement, right? So we'll say if it doesn't match, then we're going to throw an error, right? So what I'm going to do is create my own error, right? So we'll say new error, and then I'm going to insert a code here so that I have an easy way to identify the error type, and I'll show you more on this later, right? So error code file type, and then I'm going to return that error. Else, then we can go on to, oops, yeah, actually I had that right. So we'll say null on the error, and then original name. Okay, and the other thing that I want to do is I don't want to just keep the original name. I also want to add something to make it unique. So I'll add an underscore. Wait a minute, didn't work out right. And then I'll actually add the current date, just like they have in the example below. Okay, so now we can move on to the actual route, which is down here. So we can get rid of this, return this. So if it's error, we're going to check what kind of error it is, right? So we can say if error code is equal to, now the Multer has error codes for when a file is too large, and it's just like this. So you just type in limit underscore file size, okay? So that's the error code that you're going to get back if the file exceeds what you specified right here, right? So if we get that error, we're going to respond and we're going to say success false. And the message is going to be file size is too large. Max limit is 10 megabytes. Else if error code is equal to, and then this is the custom one that we created up here, which is file type, right? So here we're going to kick back an error if it doesn't match our file extension, right? So just paste that in there. And then I'll say res.json, success, false, message. Then we'll say no file, whoops, file type is invalid, must be this type. Okay. And then we'll do a catch-all for any other types of errors, and we'll just say success false, message, file was not able to be uploaded. And then I'll log it to the console here too, just in case you want to get more information on it. Okay, so then we're going to do a else if there is no error, right? So first we're going to make sure the file exists, right? So we'll say if the file doesn't exist, it's empty. Then we're going to respond with JSON. And then we'll say if the file exists, it's empty. Then we're going to respond with JSON. false. Message, no file was selected. And then else, this is the final, finally, it worked. So we'll say success true, message, file was uploaded. All right, pretty simple. Okay, so we have our route now. And so all we need to do now is implement this into the controller. And so what we'll do is we'll add a function to this form. All right, we'll say ng submit submit. Right, so that's the function that we'll use in our controller, right? So let's go ahead into our controller and create all of this. So first I'm going to create the file object to make sure it exists before we try to upload anything. And then I'm going to go ahead and create our function here. Whoops. You don't have to pass it into the function because we're just using it from the scope, right? So if you recall, we created this variable that will activate the loading bar and also disable the forms. So we'll go ahead and call that now. We'll say uploading equals true. And then so what we'll do is we'll use the service function, which was upload, right? So the way we do that is we invoke the name of the service, upload file, upload, right? So just that's directly from here, right? So that's this function, upload file dot upload. Okay, and it's expecting a file, right? So for us, it's gonna be a scope dot file, and then we'll say dot then function, and we'll say if success is true, then we can stop the uploading part. And then we can also set the alert class, which is alert success. Okay, this is bootstrap. And if you recall, we created that right here, the ng class alert. So we're setting that to the bootstrap success class, right? And then we'll set a message based on whatever is returned from the API. And then we'll clear the file, right, so that the user can't submit a bunch of times in a row, spamming the button. And then, of course, else, if this doesn't work, say uploading, stop it, false. And then we'll set the alert to alert danger. And then the message will be whatever the API returns. And then we'll also clear the file. Okay, and let's go back to our scope, our HTML. And actually what I want to do is take this label, and I put that in the wrong spot. It should actually come after the button. All right, and then going back to our controller, go ahead and don't forget to pass in, whoops, wrong spot right here, data, so that we have what was returned from the post request. Okay, and we're almost done. Let's go back to our server, and so right here in the file name, you actually want to swap this, right? So that, because this file original name, that's going to be, file name dot. You want that to end the file, not the date. Otherwise, the extension won't be read properly. So then just plug that in right here. Whoops. Okay, so then save that and let's see what we get. Go ahead and hit refresh. And select an image, and the first thing I want you to do is select a file that's not supported, right? And hit that upload button, and you should get that file type is invalid. And then just try to hit the button and make sure that you get that error of no file was selected. Okay, so we want to test that error, and that was pretty much the only two errors. And then we also had the max file size error, right? And we'll test that in a second, right? So what we can do is go back to our match here, and we can add the other ones that we want to allow, right? So those three right there. Then we can actually add that right down here to the error description. Okay, once you hit save on that, go ahead and hit refresh. And I'm going to select a file that I know is too big, and I'm going to hit upload to make sure I get that error there, right? So it's saying max limit is 10 megabytes. And so you see right there, you get that error of 10 megabytes. So then finally, we want to test the success. So just pick an image that you know is going to work and hit that upload button. Okay, and you'll see file was uploaded. And if you go to the folder that you set up, you'll see the file is saved right there. Okay, and then also you want to make sure that in the controller this file is actually working, this clear file. So just hit that upload button again and make sure you get that response, okay? Okay, so the last thing that I want to do is I want to place the preview of that image in this box right here, okay? So the way we do that is go back into our index, into our input, and we're going to add something to it. So we're going to say on change, and it's going to be angular.element, this element, scope, scope, and we'll name this function photo changed, and then we'll say this files, right, because it comes in a form of an array. So we'll say this files. So let's go ahead and build that on the in the controller, right? So we'll just say scope.photoChange, right? There's our function. So in other words, this is going to get called every time that this input changes. So in other words, when the user presses browse and selects an image, it activates this function in the controller, okay? And so we'll pass into the function the files, right, that's attached to that input. So I want to show you what this looks like. So I'll do a console log files, kind of show you really quick what this looks like when you upload an image. So I'll choose an image here, and you'll see here's the console log, right? It's just a simple file list and a file, and then it tells you the length. It's usually always going to be 1 because we only have single file uploads. So we can play with this now, right? And so what we need to do is, so we need to make sure that this this preview, this thumbnail, only gets activated if 1, there's an actual file there, and 2, it is an image, right? So if, for example, if you wanted to enable document uploads or PDFs or something, then obviously you wouldn't want an image preview here, right? So we need to check for that. And so this is how we do it, right? We have a condition and we say if files length, right? And we get that from the console log. We'll say if files length is greater than 0 and files name, and then what we'll do is we'll use the same function or regular expression that we used right here. Okay, so I'm just going to paste that right below and reference it. So we'll say, then I'm just going to copy this, paste it right there. Oops. So if you recall, the preview, we named it thumbnail.data URL. So I'm just going to copy that so that I know. Paste it right here. And so what we'll do is if it isn't a valid file that meets this criteria, meaning it's an actual file and it's an actual image, then what we'll do is we'll just clear the thumbnail object so that the default picture gets displayed, right? So we'll say scope.thumbnail, and then we'll also clear any messages. Okay, so I'm going to delete that. Okay, so now let's do everything that we need to be done if this is an actual file, right? So first we're going to activate the uploading, and then we're going to create a variable file and save the actual file, right? Because like I said before, it comes in a form of an array. So we'll grab that actual file. Then we're going to activate something called file reader, right? And this is how you do it, new file reader. Okay, and that's our way in JavaScript to read the file object in the input, right? And what we can do is we can read that file, and then we can save it in the form of a data URL, and then assign it to the thumbnail. Okay, and so actually I forgot it's going to be thumbnail.data URL. So let me actually keep that over here because I know I'll forget. So anyway, right below this, we're going to say file reader dot read as data URL, and then we pass in there the file, right? The new file that we saved from that array. Then we're going to say file reader dot onload, and then inside the function we'll pass the letter E. And then what we'll have to do is we'll have to create, we'll use timeout function, right? Because we need a delay in the onload in order for the thumbnail to get updated, right? So what it'll look like is like this. We'll pass in a function inside of timeout. And number one, we'll set the thumbnail object, right? Because we haven't set it yet. And then we'll set this part right here, the data URL, and then we'll have it match the results of this function, right? So that's how we do that, e.target.result. And then we can finally turn off the uploading and then clear any messages. Okay, let me just clean this up a bit. Okay, and actually I just realized this URL part, it's got to be capitalized. So it's going to be URL. There we go. And then we also need to grab this timeout and pass it into our controller so that Angular knows to use it. Okay, so go ahead and hit save on that. Let's see what we get. Hit refresh and select a photo and see what you get. Okay, so you should get that preview there. Then once you hit that upload button, you should see your success message along with the file. And as you see, it doesn't overwrite it because we set the time as part of the file name. So, and then also experiment with this. If you hit the browse button and then close it out, you should get that photo erased. So just kind of test that out, make sure that happens. And then also, if you select a file that's too large, it'll still show the preview, but when you hit upload, you'll get that error message. Make sure that you try to upload a Word document or PDF or something. Make sure that you do not get an error in your console. If you do, then that means you didn't configure this correctly to only allow those 3 files. And then hit the upload button and you should see that error message saying file type is invalid. Okay, so, and then of course if you go back to an image, you'll see that it changes back to what you specified. Okay, so that wraps it up for this tutorial. Thanks for watching, and let me know if you have any questions in the comment section.